Hello and welcome to this video on how to study. It's about how to calculate your grades. Now, this is one of the continuing videos in this series on how to study. You'll be able to see the links for the other posts for the other videos, in that are listed below. Right, but let's move on. All right. This is how to calculate your grades and why it's important to think about your grades. Now, let me get a new slide here and get my pen, right? This here is going to be a little difficult to explain because we have our career school, which are they're for the, development, programs such as bookkeeping and, medical assistant, vet assistant. And then we also have our college curriculums, which are associate degree and bachelor degrees. Now, in our career schools, all right, our passing is a 65, okay? And in the college curriculums, passing is a 70, right? Now, I'm not going to go through this twice, to demonstrate 65 and then demonstrate 70. I'm going to use the 70 because it's a lot easier to work with as far as numbers, but the principles all remain the same, okay? So just remember, this here is an illustration, and it's an example, and even though I'm using 70s, it equally applies to the career. You just have to make the adjustments for it, okay? Now, let's say a particular subject has 5 lessons: lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3, lesson 4, and lesson 5. And it also has a final exam or a proctor exam, okay? Yeah, I make no apologies for my handwriting. Okay, now we all understand that for multiple choice lesson exams, you're able to retake the exam in order to be able to get a higher grade, okay? And that point is going to be a little bit more important as we get to the end of this presentation, but I'm bringing it up now because you can take an exam for the first time and then you're able to retake the exam, okay? Our policy has been that if you had failed an exam, you were required to retake an exam, and the highest grade you would be able to get is passing, which would either be the 65 or the 70, okay? But now it is, well, you take the exam, it's multiple choice lesson exams, not graded projects, not subjective exams, writing assignments, or any other different type of exams, only multiple choice lesson exams, okay? You're able to retake that exam and get a higher grade. So what does that mean? All right, well, let's go and say, we're going to figure out how to calculate your grade. So let's say you take an exam and you get, say, a 70, and then you retake it and you get an 80. And let's say you take it and you get a 55, and you retake it and you get an 85. Okay, and let's say you take it and you get a 90 and you get a 90, okay? And then let's say you take it and you get a 75 and a 75 and I don't know, let's say a 90 and 100, okay? Okay, the total, 5 and 5 is 10, so that's 9, 17, 26, 33. That's 430 points. Notice I'm talking in terms of points here, okay? Now, these all average out and they make up 2/3 of your final grade. So I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 exams, 430 divided by 5 gives me an average of 86. Okay, so that's 430 divided by 5 gives me an average of 86, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. okay, an average of 86. Now, that makes up 2/3 of your grade, right? So you have to multiply that by 2, and that would give you 172 points, okay? Now notice I'm talking about points here, right? Passing is 70, okay? And if the lesson exams make up 2/3, and your final exam, your proctor exam makes up 1/3, okay? Well, 2/3 plus 1/3 is equal to 3/3. Okay, so that 3 is important because if our passing grade is 70, we multiply it by 3 in order to need to get 210 points in order to be able to pass. Well, if you need 210 points to pass, and your lesson exams you had gotten 172 points, that means you would need 38 points on your final exam in order to be able to pass the subject. And notice that that's a failing grade. It is acceptable to fail a final exam or a proctor exam, but as long as you have enough points in order to be able to pass the subject, you're able to fail the final exam. Okay, so let's kind of like go through that again. All right. Lesson exams make up 2/3, final exam makes up 1/3. That's 3/3. In order to pass, we need 70, a grade of a 70. So when we multiply it by 3, you end up with 210 points. Okay, that's the minimum number of points you need to pass. So what you do is you take and you average out all of your lesson exams, right? Whatever that total is, you divide by the number of exams, and that'll give you an average for your lesson exams. That average, you multiply it by 2 because it makes up 2/3 of the grade, right? And that gives you some total. Then you add in your proctor exam, okay? So in this case here, let's say, you know, you need 38 to pass, because if 210 is passing and you got a 30, you subtract 172 from 210, that means you only need a 38. Well, let's say you had 172 and you scored a 65, okay? So that's 7, 13, 237. Obviously that's more than 210, so you're going to pass the subject. You divide that by 3 in order to get your final grade. 237 divided by 3 gives you a final grade of a 79, okay? That would be your final grade, right? So go back over that again if you don't understand that, okay? That's how you arrive at your final grade. Now, what does this mean to you, okay? And this is kind of important, all right? Let's say that, now remember, we have lesson exams, and we have our final exam / proctor exam, right? Now, let's say that your average for your lesson exams is 75, okay? Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because your lesson exams are extremely important, okay? And you'll see why in just a second. You want to do as well as you possibly can on your lesson exams at all time, all right? And I'll show you the numbers and why this is important. Okay, if your lesson exams have an average of 75 and you multiply that by 2, okay, that means you have 150 points. You need 210 points in order to pass. So on your final exam, you need a 60 in order to pass the subject, okay? 60 is failing, but even if you did get a 60, you would pass because you had met the number of points you need, the 210. But now here's the catch, okay? You had a lesson average of 75. Your final exams or your proctor exams are tough exams. And it's been my experience, and it's subjective, it's just the way I see things. It's been my experience that whatever the student has as a lesson exam, they score on average around 80% of that, okay? It's not to say that they can't score better than that or even worse than that. I'm just saying, as a general rule, 80% of whatever their lesson average is what they get on their final exam or their proctor exam. So if you look at 80% of 75, that's right about 56, okay? Notice that's lower than what you need in order to pass. So if you had 75 and you multiply it by 2 and you had 150 and you did the average of what everybody does, okay, add in 55 points, right? So that ends up giving you 205. And now you didn't meet the requirement, right, of 210 points, and you failed the subject and you would be required to retake the subject, okay? That's, and I mean 75 is passing, okay? How you got to 75, maybe you got grades of 75, but more likely you failed an exam and you passed an exam. You took it and you passed it. But however you arrived at that 75, think about this. What happens if, for over the course of those 5 exams, you were able to answer one more, you focused a little bit more, you concentrated a little bit more, you spent a little bit extra time, and for each one of those exams, you had gotten one more question correct, okay? So that instead of having a 75, now your average is an 80, okay? Right, well, now let's look at the numbers here, okay? If I have an 80 and I multiply it by 2, that's 160 points. And if I take away, I need 210, which means I need to score a 50 on that final exam, all right, in order to pass. Okay, sure, 50 is failing, but if I score 50, I pass. Now here's the thing. Remember, your average is 80, and just like I had said over here, most students get about 80%. The average student gets about 80% of their lesson average, right? Well, that means that student is going to score about, I know that's 64, but I'm going to round to 65, and 65 is failing, okay? But notice the difference here, okay? Yeah, you're going to score 80% of the 80, which is a 65, and yeah, that's a failing grade. But when we do the math, we have 80 times 2 is 160, okay, plus the 65, okay? So that's 5, 2, 225. Notice that just because you answered one question more correct on each one of those lesson exams, now you have more than enough points to be able to pass because you only needed 210. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make here is that when it comes to your studies, the better you can do on your lesson exams, all right, uh, that makes taking your final exams or your proctor exams much, much easier. I mean, if you had an average of 90, okay, times 2, that's 180 minus 210. All you need is a grade of a 30, okay? Well, you know what? You can, if you have a grade of a 90, it's so easy to get a grade of a 30 on those proctor exams. So you've taken all of the stress and pressures away of having to do that proctor exam. People freak out over it. They're, the proctor exam, it's so hard, it's so difficult, it's this, it's that. Well, that's because when you're sitting there at a 75, okay, yeah, you're being pressured to be able to do well on it. I mean, if you have a 75, you're doing almost, what, 90% of your average in order to be able to pass. Okay. Whereas if you have a grade of a 90 and you only need 30, that's only 30% of what what you did before in order to be able to pass. It takes a lot more of the pressure and stress off, and it makes it easier to pass the final exam, the proctor exam, all because on your lesson exams, you paid a little bit more attention, you did a little bit extra work in order to be able to answer one more question correctly on all of those exams. Okay, so I hope this was beneficial to you as to how your grades are calculated and what your grades actually mean when it comes to passing and failing a subject. Okay, if you have any questions, please comment or like this video, and I'll see you next in the next edition of How to Study. Okay. Thanks and good luck with your studies.